Alright guys, so in today's video I'm going to show you a new method of factoring. It's called factoring by grouping. The reason this is important is because we do not know how to factor anything that has 4 terms. So if you look at something like this, we have never learned a way to factor that, and so that's a problem because that means anytime you come across something like that, you're never going to be able to do it. So that's the whole point of learning how to factor by grouping, is you can actually factor things that have 4 terms instead of just always 3 terms. Alright, so let's go through an example together. We'll go through the example already typed. Step 1 is you're going to group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. So either you can actually write this down or physically section them off, but you want to look at these like they're in 2 groups. Step 2 is you're going to take out the GCF from each one. So the reason that grouping works is because you put them in groups where they have a GCF. So if you look at this first group, I can take out an x squared from both of them because the first one had 3 x's and the second one had 2 x's, which means I can take out 2 x's from both of them. So let's write that down. That would be x squared, and then what would be left is just x plus 7. Okay? So I took out the x squared from both of those terms. Notice right here there was a plus sign in between, so I am going to leave that plus sign. And now we're going to do the same thing with the other green parentheses. There should be a GCF in there. And what is it? Well, it's not x because this term right here did not have an x. This term right here did have an x. So because they both didn't have an x, I can't take it out because it's not in common with both. But they both can be divided by 2. So let's go ahead and take out a 2 from both of them and write what would be left. X plus 7. Okay. So now what you do next is you should have matching terms here and here. Those should be the exact same. So when it says factor the common binomial out, you're going to go ahead and just write that one down one time. It's like you're taking it out of both. And the remaining part is you write down these leftovers as your second term. So x squared plus 2. So again, what you do is in step 1, you take out the GCF from both terms. In step 2, you take what they have in common, so this one, and you write that down one time. And then you take the leftovers, so this one, and that becomes your other term. And that's it. That's how grouping works. It's pretty quick and pretty easy. But I do want to make sure that we always FOIL that back out and check our answer. So let's do that. If I take x, this first term, and distribute it to both these others, I would get x cubed plus 2x. Now I'm going to take this plus 7 and distribute that to the others, and I would get 7x squared plus 14. And does that match the original problem up here? Yes, it does. I have x cubed plus 2x, and it's just a little out of order. So if we were to actually write it in standard form, and standard form is where you do the highest degree first, so x cubed is the highest degree. X squared is the second highest degree, so I'll write that second, then the 2x, and then the 14. So you start with the highest power of x, and then you go down. That's what standard form is. So notice in standard form, after I FOILed it, it matches exactly the problem up here. So I know that my factoring by grouping worked. Okay, so let's just do lots of examples of that. So first step is you want to section off your groups and make sure they're sectioned so that there is a GCF. If you section it off and there's not a GCF, then you probably sectioned it off incorrectly. Also, you know that you sectioned it off correctly if all your terms are in standard form. So this is x cubed, x squared, x, and then there's no x's. So that starts with the highest power and goes down, which means you definitely have it written in the correct way. Okay, so section off my groups and then take a GCF out of both groups. So in the first group, I can take out an x squared, and what would be left is x plus 4. And even right here, if you FOIL that back out, you could check and see that if you do this, you get x cubed. If you do this, you get 4x squared. So really at every stage, you can always FOIL things back out or multiply it back out to check that you got the right answer. Okay, and then I have this plus sign here, so I'm going to leave the plus sign there. And now I'm going to factor the next binomial out. So with 8x and 32, you can divide both of those by 8. So let's take an 8 out, and what would be left is x plus 4. So notice how we have matching terms right here. So your matching terms you're going to write down once, And then your leftover terms you're going to write down once. So these were my leftovers, so x squared plus 8, I'll write that down. And that's it. You factored it. So that's your final answer, and you are done. Again, you could always check this out and make sure your answers correctly by foiling. I'm going to clear the screen here, so if you need to look this over, pause the video and write down those steps. All right, let's do the next one. It's already in standard form, so I can section it off as it is and start taking out GCFs of both groups. So in the first group, I can take out an a squared of both of them, and what would be left is a plus 2. Then I have this plus sign here, so I'm going to leave the plus sign. And now let's factor out the second group, 9a plus 18. I can take out a 9 of both of those, and I would have a plus 2 left. Last step is put together your common term. So a plus 2 is your common term. So I'm going to write that down once. And then your leftovers, a squared plus 9. And then you write your leftover group down once. And that's it. That's your final answer. This right here, you factored by grouping, and you're done. All right, pause the screen if you need to look that over. I'm going to clear the page. All right, our next one's already in standard form, so we can start grouping it off, but you might notice that there's a negative sign now. So what we should probably do going forward is when you group it, you should just include the sign in your second group. So we didn't have to really focus on that in the other ones because it was just a plus sign, and so it wouldn't have changed anything. But probably a way of doing it that would make you never make mistakes is if when you group it, you just always include the sign in that second term like that. So again, it didn't really matter when it was a plus sign, but when it's a negative sign, that's really going to mess you up. So it's probably good when you group to always put the sign in your second group. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take out any GCF that we can take out. So in the first group, I have w cubed plus 5w squared, so I can take out a w squared from both. And what would be left is w plus 5. And in the second group, notice they both have a negative, so I can definitely take out a negative, but then also I can divide both of them by 8. This is 8, so obviously that divides by 8, and 40 also divides by 8. So I'm going to take out a negative 8. And what would be left is w plus 5. Okay, because remember, negative 40 divided by negative 8, a negative divided by negative is a positive, so that's why this term is a positive. Okay, so notice now I have matching groups. I have my matching groups here and here. So that's going to be one of my factors, the matching group. And the other one, remember you only write that down once, and the other one is this leftover group, w squared minus 8. Okay, and that's your answer. And we are done. I will say this, most of the time you do see it with this one written first just because it has a higher power. Actually, I'll keep writing in green. So I am going to do that, and I think that'd probably be a good thing to do going forward is whichever one has your highest degree, just probably write that term first because it looks more like standard form. So between this line here and this line here, I didn't change anything besides flip-flop the order that I wrote the factors, and that's still the exact same answer. But this one's just probably more of a preferable answer. All right, pause if you need to look that over, and then we'll work on the fourth one together. All right, so let's look at the last one. Section off your groups, and you want to include the sign, that negative sign, in your second group. And now we'll go through each group and see if there is a GCF. So in the first group, I have p5 and p to the third power. So I can definitely take out a p cubed, and what would be left is p squared minus 6. And in my second one, I can definitely take out a negative because this one has a negative, and you usually want your leading coefficient to be positive. So I'm going to take out a negative just so that one will be positive. And, okay, so I'll write that down. I'm going to take out a negative. But then also, it looks like both of them can be divided by 2. So I'm also going to take out a 2. And what would be left is this would be p squared. And then if I do 12, this is a positive 12, divided by negative 2 would be negative 6. And now notice you have matching groups, so that's good. So we can write down the matching group, so p squared minus 6 as one of your terms, and then we write the leftover terms as the other, p cubed minus 2. And that's it. That's your final answer. P cubed minus 2, parentheses, p squared minus 6. And we have factored by grouping, and we're done. All right, so let's do a couple more examples together. I'll do this one with you, and then I'll have you guys do this one on your own. All right, so the first one, let's go ahead and group them off and see what sort of GCF I can take out. In the first group, it looks like they both can divide by 3, but also an x squared. So I'll take out a 3x squared, and what would be left is x minus 7. And in the second group, it looks like both of them can be divided by 4. I'm not going to do negative 4 because this leading one was not negative. We really only take out a negative if this leading one here is negative. But it's not, so I'm just going to take out a positive 4. And so when I do that, oops, I will get it to look like this. So I'm taking out a 4, and that was a positive 4, so I'm going to write plus 4. And I would get x minus 7. Okay, so now I have my matching terms, the x minus 7, so I can write that down as one of my factors, and then the leftovers, 3x squared plus 4. So 3x squared plus 4 is my other factor. And that's it, I'm done. Okay, I think I want to point out one more thing. When we were taking out let me just erase a little bit. In this second grouping, when I said let's take out a 4, if you had just written down 4 and then you wrote x minus 7, I think some of you might be confused then when we go to group and you're not sure what to do with this and this. But it seems more clear when you have a plus 4 written in that you literally just write down 3x squared plus 4. But when you don't have that plus written in, I think maybe it might be confusing. So that's why I think no matter if it's positive or negative, it might be good to always write the sign there. Okay, cool. Let me have you guys do the last one on your own, but I will get you started. So group it off like this, and then factor out a GCF. Hit play, and we'll check just that much. So just factor out the GCF of both terms. Okay, so this is what it looks like when I take the GCF out of both. I could take an 8x squared out of both things in the first term, and in the second term, since my leading coefficient was negative, I took out a negative to make it positive, so that's why this is a negative 3. But then they also could both be divided by 3, so I also took that out. And I could see maybe some of us messing up this term. The reason that's positive 1 is because you're doing negative 3 divided by negative 3, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay, so let me rewrite that nice and neat, and now we can move forward. So to finish up factoring, your matching terms right here, that'll be one of your factors, so 2x plus 1, and then your leftover terms, this and this, will be your other factor. So 8x squared minus 3 is your other factor, and then this is your final answer. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen, so pause it here if you need to look that over. All right, so the last one. The last one's just telling you that sometimes the only GCF you might be able to take out is a negative, and that's okay. So let's group it off just like we normally do. And let's look at that first group. I can take out definitely a 9 from both, but I can also take out a y squared. So I'm going to do 9y squared, and what would be left is y plus 2. Then when I look at my next one, there's nothing that I can take out. It already says y plus 2. So what you can think is just taking out a 1. And taking out a 1 doesn't change anything. And when I say take out, I'm saying, mathematically, I mean divide by. So when you divide by 1, it doesn't change anything. So it's okay to look at this term and take out a 1 like I did here and still leave the remaining term left in parentheses. Okay, and if you feel iffy about that, just think about multiplying that back in. If you were to distribute that back in, and you multiply both of those by 1, it's not going to change anything. So it's helpful to take out the 1 because then you have your matching groups right here, and that's what we wanted the whole time. Okay, so then remember, one of my factors is those matching groups we just discussed, and the other one is these leftovers right here, so 9y squared plus 1. And that's why it's important to write this plus 1, because otherwise you wouldn't know what number to write here if you didn't actually write that out. So it's important that you physically write out that you took out a 1. That way you include it in your factors right here. Alright, so pause if you need to look that over for more time, and then let's look at the last one. I'll do it with you guys. So last one, let's section it off into our 2 groups and start taking out a GCF. So in the first group, I can take out definitely a p squared. And I know that I thought first maybe I could divide them both by 6, but 21 does not divide by 6. But there is another number that both of them can be divided by, and that would be 3. I can divide both of these by 3. So let's take out a 3p squared, and what would be left is 2p plus 7. And that looks pretty good. Okay, and then in my other one, notice this is almost matching with this one, but all the signs are flipped, which means we need to take out a negative, which we kind of already knew because this leading coefficient was already a negative, so normally we want to take those out anyways. So we'll take out our negative, and then what would be left is just these signs flip, 2p plus 7. And that's actually good because now these match perfectly, so now I can write down my answer. My first factor is going to be those matching terms, and then my other one is going to be these leftover terms, 3p squared. And what does this negative mean? Remember, it really means negative 1. So my other term is going to be 3p squared minus 1. And this is my final answer. Okay, and that's it for today, you guys. So if you understand factoring by grouping, taking out negatives, and just making sure that you have matching groups like here and here like we saw, then you are all good to go.